my enormous pleasure to introduce Declan Walsh, who's probably very well known to most of you, as he's writing as the correspondent for The Guardian, and has been based in Islamabad for the past 3 years, where he's covered a whole number of wonderful stories in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, and also in that very intriguing little bit in between, which seems to be the rather the fulcrum of the story there. Prior to that, Declan was with the Irish Times and also the Independent in Nairobi for 5 years, where he covered lots and lots of conflicts, including Liberia and Congo, and also some elections down in Zimbabwe, and about 20 other stories as well, which is great. And actually, Declan started off his kind of career working for one of the most nationalist, Irish nationalist publications, I think probably ever to have been published. Even more nationalist than Republican News, being the only publication in the world to write an editorial against the terms of the agreement of the Good Friday Agreement, which is quite an achievement. Anyway, and Declan started off by studying business studies at university. So somewhere along the line, something's clearly gone very wrong. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a minute. As well as being a very well-known writer at the Guardian, Declan's also a very prolifically published photographer and many other things as well. So I suppose what first thing I'd like to ask, and just to sort of look at, is you're writing for The Guardian, you're taking a lot of pictures, you're becoming very involved in multimedia, mixing images with text and also audio. So in terms of like how you see yourself as a journalist, how you see yourself working, what do you think of yourself doing? How do you characterise who you are and what you do professionally?
Well, I'm still principally just a regular text reporter. I mean, you know, I'm the correspondent for The Guardian in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and there's lots of news to cover, so that's sort of most of what I do. But I've a slightly unusual history in that I started taking pictures before I was writing, and I've always had this interest in photography that I've used on and off, you know, during my career. Not so much doing news photos, but sometimes taking photographs to illustrate features and so on. And now, because there's a great sort of push within The Guardian and within the whole newspaper industry to get involved in multimedia, I've started doing some of these slideshows where you use the photographs, use a range of 20 or 30 photographs from a story, most of which would normally not be used within a Guardian news story, if you like. Usually there's only 1 or 2 or maybe 5 of its feature. And we started putting all of this together in a sort of new way of telling the same stories, really, if you like.
Right. So in a way, what you're doing is kind of partly traditional news journalism and partly recycling a lot of material that wouldn't ordinarily be used into new and exciting media formats.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, the frustrating thing often in journalism, especially in sort of places that we're travelling to, is that you pick up this sort of fantastic range of material, you meet great characters, you've got, you know, wonderful stories from the road, and sometimes the most interesting things that happen are the things that sort of happen on the periphery of, you know, the hard news that you're reporting on. So for me, what's attractive about these new formats is that sometimes it just gives you a chance to tell that stuff that, you know, normally you just don't really get to see.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at some pictures.
All right.
And then I think Declan's going to give us a commentary as we go through, and then we'll come back to some images and talk about them more afterwards.
So the first set are just pictures from the. Oh, it's moving. How annoying. These are all pictures from the. Can we see the full frame there? We can. Yeah, more or less. These are all pictures from the Pakistani earthquake, which was October 2005. Quite a difficult story to cover, just because it was physically pretty exhausting, and it was also quite difficult, basically, you know, dealing with all these sort of thousands of people who were injured, and we were very much in the centre of it. Now these pictures are from Afghanistan. This is an embed I did recently in Helmand with British soldiers, but also partly with a medical unit, what they call sort of the equivalent of the MASH units that served in Korea in the 50s. So we were based in a based in the main camp bastion, and then travelling around by helicopter to pick up wounded soldiers. That's the view from the back of a Chinook helicopter. They're very proud of their medical facilities. So this is a digital X-ray machine, and that's an American soldier who had been hit by shrapnel from a grenade attack, I think. This is a British medic while he was actually administering first aid to a soldier who unfortunately later died from a gunshot wound. This is in the operating theatre. And then these are some pictures, hopefully, from these are pictures, hopefully, from Sangin, which is a place that it's a very small town in Helmand that has become very well known in Britain among people who read about Afghanistan anyway recently, because it's sort of been the Alamo for British troops. Now it's more or less within their control, but until a couple of months ago, it was basically like sort of a sponge for Taliban fire. And it was very hard to get in and out of. Now it's improving. This is Canadian soldiers firing howitzer shells on the edge of Sangin. We'd been told that Sangin was under control, and when we arrived there, they were just sort of plastering the place with 155mm shells, which, if you've ever heard one, makes the most god-awful racket. And they were firing, I don't know, 150 of them in a day. I mean, the whole ground shakes. And these were Canadians who were doing it. This was actually at the beginning when, when this mission came, the British were very optimistic, and there was a lot of talk, of course, from John Reid that they would come and that there would be no shots fired, and the British were really going out of their way to show that they would be different from the Americans who had been there before them and had a sort of touch with the common man and so on. So this was early on. You can see the soldiers interacting with locals, and it's a soft-skinned vehicle and all that. If you went there now, you definitely wouldn't see anything like this. This is actually from an American embed I was on in Kunar, which is really the centre of American activity in Helmand, and we were on a convoy coming down a mountain valley when we came under fire from the Taliban. There was sort of an ambush, and these are the guys who were in the vehicle behind us who were opening fire across the valley. This again, sorry, this is the order. This is Sangin again. This is where they hang out. And this is the bazaar in Helmand. And this is a lady whose name is Fazia Ulume, and she's a very brave woman who heads the women's department in Helmand and Lashkar. And she's had numerous threats from the Taliban and actually from other sources as well. I mean, one of the most complicated things about the insurgency, or about the situation in Afghanistan in general, is that people, the Taliban are there as a force, of course, but there's all sorts of other roguery and criminals and so on who are involved in intimidation and violence. I was speaking to this woman one day, and I said to her, she had received some threats, and I said, well, of course, that's the Taliban. And she said, well, no, actually, she thought it was some rival who didn't like her and wanted her job and had, paid someone to do this. So that's sort of how lawless things are. This just gives you a sense of what it's like in... this is actually Kunar, going through the mountains. The Americans don't bring very much in by road because it's too dangerous. There's a lot of attacks in the valleys. So that's actually a shipping container that's been slung underneath that Chinook helicopter. This is President Karzai in Kandahar, and you can just see here the sort of security that goes with him everywhere. I mean, it's incredible. I think he must be one of the most closely guarded heads of state in the world. And this was an unannounced walk around the town. Everyone was extremely tense. There had been a big suicide bombing a couple of days before. And he actually bristles. He wants to get out. He wants to talk to people and meet them. But it's very difficult. And this is something that's quite topical at the moment. This young lad was hit by Canadians, I think. It's what would you call it? I suppose a friendly fire. But because the violence has ratcheted up to the level where there's a great tension between the locals and foreign troops coming a lot of attack, so that they're extremely wary about people they see, and there's been a number of incidents where they've opened fire on people suspecting that they're Taliban or about to attack them, and they weren't. And this poor guy had just been shot in the leg, I think, and he was being brought in the back of the taxi. It's just And now this is the, so now we're just slightly moving on to the border. You hear a lot about the border and articles or coverage about Pakistan and Afghanistan. This just gives you an idea what the border area actually looks like on the ground. As you can see, it's pretty, this is in summer, and the next one, hopefully. This is a Pakistani army post in the winter. This is actually in Waziristan, on the border between the two.